TCU 5-4 in Big 12 play, 6-4 overall. Offensive line was a mess last season. We've got a change on that staff. Tight ends coach moves inside to be the new offensive line, and they're rebooting it. They got a guy named Brandon Coleman in from the JUCO route that showed up in my research. We are, of course, comfortable with our quarterback position, Max Duggan being able to play football. That sure seemed like it was an exciting thing to even celebrate last season. Now let's start to see a step forward for him. I think that the offense in general wasn't very explosive. Defensively, they should be solid up front, but we might have some questions in the secondary. There hasn't been long periods of time in the Gary Patterson TCU tenure where there isn't a spike, right? Like he's pretty good at, even if it's a down on the chart, he gets back up there. He flirts with or gets double-digit wins every couple of years. It's been a minute since the last spike. So I think that it's an interesting spot for TCU where I don't see the pieces in place, but I'm looking forward to being proven wrong. Where y'all at with the Horned Frogs?
I'm going to come to the offensive line's defense here.
Okay.
Slanderous accusations.
Okay.
I don't think TCU's offensive line was that bad last year. I think they had a quarterback who held onto the ball a lot and who kind of just danced around in the pocket before taking off and then kind of got tackled and it counted as sacks and all that kind of stuff. Because if you look at the metrics, like TCU's offensive line finished in line yards 55th, which isn't great. Standard downs 37th, which is pretty good. Passing downs 113th. But that's also because they had a higher sack rate. And again, if you look at the rest of their metrics and just from watching with the eye test, it suggests to me a lot of those sacks were on the QB, not so much the line. So
hanging on to it too much, scurrying around.
So please apologize to the TCU offensive line, Chip.
Well, most of them are gone. All right. We're rebooting the damn line. Okay. One way or another, we got new contributors that are stepping in.
All right, fine. Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting year. I don't have a great read on the Horned Frogs going into the spring. I do feel like I think it's an important year because you mentioned that they haven't had the Gary Patterson spike. And I feel like we're approaching that point where it's like we can no longer just assume that good season is going to come. And I feel like this is going to be a very important year for Gary Patterson and TCU. Whereas if this is just another kind of mediocre 6-6, 5-7, 7-5 kind of year, that might just be what we need to expect from TCU going forward. So I don't know what to expect. I just know that that's what I'm going to be looking at this spring. I just want to see I'd like to see improve at quarterback play because I like Max Duggan, but I don't think that he should be your answer. I think that I'd like to see him improve. I'd like to see some guys step up at the receiver spot to create a little more, explosiveness to the offense. Really, I think the defense will probably still be pretty well coached. It'll be pretty good. I don't know if it's as talented as it has been in recent years, though, and I think that's a concern. So it's an important year, I think, for the Horned Frogs.
I'm buying.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah, so look, I think Duggan is a dude who, because of his inexperience playing football, still has some unlocked potential, right? He was actually a 4-sport guy in high school. I believe he was basketball, football, track, and wrestling, I think it was. Like an Iowa kid. So he's not a dude who grew up on the 7-on-7 circuit with the private quarterback coaching and all that stuff. So I think his trajectory might be a little bit, more up than some other guys have who grew up sort of in like the quarterback factory. They've been coached with the private quarterback coach, since a young age, et cetera. That offense just needed to grow up last year. I do think the offensive line had struggles at times. They had some of their stuff was just turning guys totally loose. It wasn't necessarily always getting whipped, but they were 122nd in havoc rate allowed. I mean, remember, only had 127 teams last year. Like Duggan had some issues. I think they had some missed checks. The receivers were largely inexperienced and not great. I just think you're going to see improvement basically all across the board there. Zach Evans came along late. Zach Evans is a guy who, if he had his stuff together, very likely could have been a 5-star for us on 24/7 Sports, and talent-wise was the number 1 back in that year's class that he ultimately signed with TCU. My real concern here, which is weird to say about a Gary Patterson defense, is the defense, right? They were okay last year, but they weren't. I don't know. I didn't think they were like really all that amazing. And I mean, top 20 was nice, but they it surprises me the number of explosive plays they allowed last year, given some of the names in the back end. I mean, when you have, Wallow and Morgan and Washington, and you're 126th in passing explosiveness allowed, like there's some kind of disconnect there. So maybe this year they'll play a little more conservatively on defense to counteract some of the losses they have, because those are three pretty big names that you lose in the back end. But that was such a hit or miss defense last year. I mean, like, who is 7th in passing success rate allowed and 126th in passing explosiveness allowed? Like that doesn't happen. So I think I'm buying.
I think I'm buying. I like it.
Yeah,
That's the lukewarm endorsement of TCU. I think Gary Patterson is on the hot seat quietly. I mean, you look at the last 3 years, 7-6, 5-7, 6-4. Watch out for September 25th. Cal, interesting game from the Pac-12, September 11th. Then they play SMU. Like, if you lose to little old SMU right down the street, that's not going to bode well. I don't think they will, but that would be a disastrous loss. And that could be one of those ones where, they just kind of get a little more frustrated. And if that unfolds, then you wonder where the program is going. I think this team, clearly, it's not just this year. Where they have struggled is on the offensive side of the ball. And in this conference specifically, if you struggle on the offensive side of the ball, and a lot of it's been inconsistent quarterback play and change over a coordinator, you're going to struggle. So I think you see this sometimes with defensive-minded coaches where they worry about what they do great, and it's got to be incredibly frustrating for Gary Patterson to watch the struggles of the offense when he usually puts out a typically pretty stout defense and just not be able to win the games. But I think this is going to be a real interesting year for TCU. And I'm with you guys that I don't know exactly which way it's going to go, but you've had 3 years now where there's a body of work that is not too impressive. And it's not, I think, Gary Patterson, after the 2017 season, when they went 11-3, if you said who were the top 5, top 10 coaches in college football, Gary Patterson's name is coming up in almost all of them. But it's very much, what have you done for me lately? And maybe there's a thought of, well, maybe the message just isn't resonating anymore, which I think is okay. And we've seen coaches changes made because of that before. So I think this is a huge year for Gary Patterson. I don't know if many people would be willing to say that he's on the hot seat, but I think he is.
3 top 10 finishes in a 4-year span and 5 top 10 finishes in less than a decade, from 2008 being the first one, 2017 being the last one. And you're right. We do the CBS Sports Coach rankings. Gary Patterson is a mainstay at the top. And it is going to be very interesting to see where everyone puts their ballot coming up this offseason, because nothing's better than ranking coaches.